Welcome back to Found in Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. This is your host, Rafael Collazo, and today is a very special, some would say historic edition of the Found in Translation Talk Show. If you're watching this either as a YouTube talk show, live, or as a watch party on Facebook, Periscope, or listening as a podcast on your podcast distribution app of pleasure. Again, this is Joe Straco Yasso. Thank you for joining us again on this very special edition of Found in Translation. I want to turn quickly to my co-host and the producer of Found in Translation, Albert Garcia. Albert, you're going to turn the tables on me because you're actually going to interview me today on this very special edition.
It's true, Ray. It's true. As Ray said, I'm Albert Garcia. I'm the co-host for today's special edition of Found in Translation. We're going to turn the tables on Ray today, as he said, because he has a very special announcement, and I'll be facilitating this conversation for our Found in Translation community. On this special episode, Ray Collazo, a nationally recognized political activist and the host of the longest-running Latino Lead Political Talk podcast, will be announcing his endorsement for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Ray, this is really an exciting day.
This is very exciting, and we've been very transparent and real with our Found in Translation audience that we were going to provide real, unvarnished, no corporate interests, no media conglomerate putting pressure on us. No, we're just going to give our straight analysis of this Democratic primary process and this electoral season. And one of the things that I committed to our Found in Translation audience is that while I had that until today, not publicly made my endorsement known or actually had decided until the last couple of days of my personal endorsement for President of the United States, but that if and when that time came, I would be transparent with our audience. And while we'll continue to provide our unvarnished analysis, I wanted the audience to know if I had already made my personal choice. So after obsessing around this Democratic primary process, analyzing and watching every debate extremely closely, listening to interviews with these candidates, watching interviews, reading various policy proposals, that's a lot of personal reflection and prayer. I'm here to announce today that I've made making a public proclamation of my personal endorsement for Julian Castro for President of the United States.
Wow. It's a major announcement, right? Share with the audience, the process that you went through to, in terms of deciding why Julian Castro at this point in time.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important not only to share the announcement, but also to let people know in a very transparent manner my personal process. This is my personal process. Everybody has their own process. And again, we respect and respect everyone's personal decisions, whether you've already picked someone that's not Julian or you're still sort of on the sidelines like the majority of Democrats and the majority of people that'll be voting in these upcoming primary seasons. We encourage people to sort of get engaged in this because you're going to have to make your decision very soon. But I wanted to share some of the four areas I was looking at as it related to why maybe initially I wasn't seriously considering Julian Castro, to be very honest with you, and we can talk more about that. But it ultimately led me to making this decision to personally endorse. And I want to emphasize my personal endorsement has nothing to do with my career and other institutional affiliations. But first of all, I was looking for a candidate. I have looked for a candidate, and now I've found a candidate I believe prioritizes the things that are important to me. And I think there's many issues, but I think they can really be summarized in two pillars. One is who's a president, who the next president can be that truly, genuinely, and passionately would prioritize engaging in policy solutions that address economic inequality. I think on some level, many of the issues that we're dealing with go back to that large, that category of conversation, and that major issue that, as you've seen from the feedback from candidates and people, and some would say on both sides of the aisle, this populist movement that's come that has had both left and right formations over the last several years. Really, income inequality has been a big strand of that. And then the other pillar of a candidate, and now my candidate, Julian Castro, someone that's going to prioritize and center their policy and their leadership around addressing the issues around institutional racism in our society. And there's many issues: policing, the island, Puerto Rico, immigration, institutional racism as it relates to education, healthcare, economic growth. We just had Latino equal pay rate, pay equality day the other day. Those kind of issues are what I care about, and I believe the candidate that I've just endorsed Julian Castro, has centered his campaign on, what can center his presidency on when elected next year. The other pillar of my thinking around this really was around who has the courage to lead. It's easy to talk about these issues and sort of talk about being an electable Democrat, and democratic and quote unquote bring people together, but who really has the courage to kind of go there and talk about the issues that really are important? Julian has really been one of the very few candidates that's and maybe could argue the only candidates that couched his policy platforms are on addressing the issues of people in poverty, the poor. Oftentimes, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, we talk about politics as sort of in middle class terms. How can we help the middle class? Now, we're talking more in sort of working class framework, but really, how do we help the most vulnerable people in our society? And so I believe that Julian Castro has shown that sort of leadership, talking about decriminalizing and not treating immigrant families who are crossing our border or trying to seek asylum as criminals has taken a lot of political courage on Julian's part. And that's just one example where I believe he's shown the courage to lead. I think the third thing that I've been looking for and I find in Julian is ethical leadership. This guy is clean. This is a brother that's clean, no scandals, someone that I believe, and having some personal knowledge of him and some brief encounters, but having a lot of mutual friends, a few mutual mentors from San Antonio in the southwest part of the country, we can vouch that Julian Castro can provide the ethical leadership that I believe the country is going to need right now, because we really should not only bring our country together from a policy perspective, and because we're very rudderless right now, but also we need to get back to our moral center. And finally, and this may sound a little odd to some people that see a very boyish guy, experience. One of the things that I think I sort of held against Julian when thinking about who I would support. I've liked Julian for some time along his career, starting as mayor of San Antonio. But I had wondered and have wondered over this process: does Julian have the experience to be president of the United States? And I think that's a fair question. And I wanted to put some things in perspective. The first one is, President Obama had only been a U.S. senator essentially months before he declared his candidacy. Um, the city of San Antonio, I think, had a larger population when he was mayor of San Antonio than the state of Arkansas had when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. So to put in perspective some of these dynamics, obviously leading a very important federal department like Housing and Urban Development as the cabinet secretary during the Obama administration, being the mayor of San Antonio, a very wide array of experiences and management experiences, which I believe prepare Julian for this challenge. So those are the four areas, LB, I've been looking at and that I centered my analysis on as I've reviewed the candidacies of all these candidates over the last year or so.
Right. Why now? Why make the decision now? Right. I mean, some people might say that it's already too late in the game, and that especially a little too late for him, for Julian. And that maybe you should be focused on the top tier. Some people would also say, wow, big surprise, another Latino supporting another Latino. So why now?
That's an excellent question, LB, and I think it's a fair question. I think there's a couple things. Is that one is I didn't prejudice my personal endorsement process in any way. And I shared this on countless episodes of Found in Translation and in social media content that we produced, and just in my public personal life and speaking on these issues, that I was only going to declare my endorsement for candidacy when I really felt compelled to do so. If I felt compelled to do so, there's been cycles where I've not made an endorsement until after the primary season for president in my career. And so I think I just want people to understand that this is not, I feel bad for the Latino guy. Like I said, when he declared his candidacy, I wasn't real optimistic about it. And he had a lot to show me. And what I want people to understand is that he not only has shown me a tremendous amount as it relates to leadership, focusing on the issues that I personally care about and I believe should be the priorities of the next president, coming out with very thoughtful policy proposals again and again, and really steering the debate. And I think one of the things, again, making this decision essentially Thursday morning, the morning after the debates, and texting Albert, my brother Michael Collazo, and other close confidants that I had made this personal decision, is that it really occurred to me after watching the debate and thinking about what was missing. And what was missing was really a thoughtful conversation around the lens of how these issues impact people of color. A thoughtful conversation around how issues like immigration, reproductive rights, indigenous issues, climate change really have to be looked at through that lens of social justice. And now, economic inequality and racial disparities are such a big part of why these issues have fomented to become such crises in our country. And again and again, I realized, as sort of in reflecting on Thursday morning, is that a big reason that those issues didn't come up was that Julian was not there to take leadership on those issues in the debate. And there's how many times, LB, have I either text you guys or had these conversations on our post debate shows where I've said, you know what? Julian was a step ahead again when it comes to talking about criminal justice issues, the issues of the trans community. Puerto Rico, he began his campaign on the island of Puerto
Yep.
Rico. Not a small thing, obviously, for someone like me as well that cares very much about 8 million Americans that have been second class citizens in our society for over a century. And so I think again and again, Julian's shown that leadership. And quite honestly, if this was about the polls and positioning myself personally, I wouldn't have declared my support for Julian. And on some level, I'm not making this. I'm not jumping on a bandwagon. I'm showing my personal leadership and being transparent with our founding translation community because I felt compelled to make this decision at this time, and I believe Julian Castro is the right candidate for us right now.
Ray, how did you go about whittling down the field in terms of and what are some of your thoughts about some of the other candidates that folks normally are always talking about? The Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Kamala
Sure.
Harris.
Yeah. So I want to be, again, very transparent with people about this process. And I actually have sort of put them in sort of four categories that I wanted to share with people. And I think it'll be very instructive to people around thinking about my process. And again, I did not go into this process hoping a Latino would jump in a race so I can endorse a Latino. I did not jump in this process assuming I would support a candidate of color. I did not jump in this process as someone that identifies myself ideologically first. I think I'm generally a progressive person, but I don't, sort of really prioritize or lead my personal sort of political thought process around purely ideology, whether as a moderate, center left. I really try to sort of go into this sort of, I don't want to say open minded, but really with just my own personal thoughts and views on this work. And sort of leave it at that without any sort of filter. But I'll say this, that there's four candidates, major candidates in this process that I've seriously considered endorsing or seriously considered supporting through this process. Those four, besides Julian Castro, of course, who I've ultimately decided to endorse publicly, is Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, Senator Booker, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. All four of them, I've essentially in my mind flirted with supporting. And if you had asked me, gun to your head, Ralph, 6 weeks ago or a month ago, who you have to make an endorsement right now, it would have been Elizabeth Warren. I think, she's been a clear number two for me personally, because I believe she does believe in those tenets of addressing income inequality, and does have a fairly strong sense from a policy perspective of how we have to address these issues with that institutional racism lens and the disparity and equality lens. So someone I and maybe would support in the future if Julian was no longer in the race. Senator Sanders is a good brother. I mean, who doesn't love Senator Sanders? I think Senator Sanders sort of wins the award for me for how he has empowered people of color in his campaign. And we've talked about this numerous times on the show. And we would not be in a position where we would be able to really kind of have so many of these progressive policies as sort of mainstream debate, a part of the mainstream debate of a Democratic primary in 2020 without the leadership of Senator Sanders, not only in 2016, but for decades. So my hat's off to him and someone that I'm really glad is in the fight. Senator Cory Booker, someone beside probably I have the best personal relationship of anyone in the field. Someone I'm quite fond of, and someone who I've considered, particularly early on in the race, for personally endorsing. And Mayor Pete Buttigieg, someone I think has a very strong chance to win this nomination ultimately. Someone who I think is a great talent and a rising star in our party, and I think brings a lot to the table. So those are the four that I have seriously considered. And we can talk about why, They weren't ultimately my final choice, but those four I certainly personally considered. I think Mayor Pete, just to put it on the table, just to give one example, I just don't think, and it's not about not being a person of color, but I just don't think that he's steeped enough in understanding the totality of the Democratic coalition. And I think he's someone that, would want to do the right thing generally for people of color. But I just think his lack of connection with us as president, he just wouldn't prioritize it. And that's why he just wouldn't, at this point, has not shown me enough in that area for my personal endorsement, but a strong candidate nevertheless. The other category, briefly, is two people that one is still technically a candidate, and the other who I think made a strong run, and I wish was able to stick around longer. I'm speaking about both Senator Bennett, who's still from Colorado, Michael Bennett, who's still in the race nominally, and former or I think current Washington Governor Jay Inslee, two people that just haven't picked up much traction, but I think I was quite fond of, and I could have seen a path potentially for me to support them if things had shaken out a little differently. The next category of people are people who I'm quite fond of, want to see have a major role in the Democratic Party moving forward, but I just don't feel they quite bring enough to the table for me to seriously consider them for endorsing president at this time. One is Senator Harris. I mean, she's an incredible woman. I hope she's president one day. And I just think at this moment in history, I just don't think she sort of has formulated her argument for the case strong enough for me. And I think the clunkiness of her organization has shown me that, just the whole package isn't quite ready for my personal endorsement, but someone who I think is fantastic. And again, I'd love to see be president one day. Beto O'Rourke, who's someone I have a lot of personal love for. The one I've known the longest, all these people, we went to college together, LB, which we talked about much on the show. And I think when he left the stage, the presidential stage, I was able to reflect on and say, we really, as Democrats, really put Beto in a tough spot. We asked him basically start to run for president just months after running for 2 years for senator of Texas. So didn't have the time or the organization to really run the race. I think he could have if things had been a little different, but Beto's still going to be in our hearts, and we look forward to working with him. It's someone who I think is who I on the show I think have flirted with quite a bit and have given him a lot of love. Who I like. I'm glad he's in the mix. I've supported his candidacy in many ways in terms of elevating his visibility. Andrew Yang is a good brother. I want to keep working with him. I just don't think he has the well-rounded background to be president of the United States at this point, but someone we have a lot of love for. And I think the elephant in the room, I think we got to talk about. And again, I want to be real straight up with everybody as it relates to this. The last category is really a singular figure, and that's our former vice president, Joe Biden. Joe Biden, of all of these people, is someone who I've had the longest, I don't want to say personal relationship, but longest relationship with. Growing up as a child in North Philadelphia, when you're a senator in Delaware, you're essentially a local elected official in the media. Subsequently, as I became an organizer in my young college and early 20s, did a significant amount of organizing with the Latino community in Delaware, had an opportunity to interact with Senator Joe Biden as a senator. We walked in Puerto Rican Day parades in Wilmington, Delaware together, attended Latino festivals, interacted with him on many levels. Some of his strongest Latino supporters are very good, close personal friends of mine. My wife worked very closely with Beau Biden in her career. So we got a lot of love for this family. And I want to thank Joe for all the decades of service. Of course, the pinnacle of which being serving as President Obama's wingman as Vice President of the United States, where he did generally an excellent job in doing so. But I think to sum up why I never really considered Vice President Biden seriously for my own personal endorsement is the incident that took place, the moment that took place in South Carolina a few days ago, where during a town hall, I believe it was in Greenwood, South Carolina, a Latino immigrant rights activist asked a simple question: would President Biden stop the deportations and significantly curb the impact of ICE in vulnerable immigrant communities? And Vice President Biden, his statement will then support Trump when refused to sort of seriously engage in that conversation, really crystallized for me what has been and what I have wanted to repel as part of this cycle beyond the individual candidates. But that really, to me, it starts with this attitude by white Democrats that are seen as minority friendly over the years, really started with President Clinton in 92, continued with Secretary, Senator, and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, and now is embodied in Vice President Biden, which is this attitude that, hey, we're white Democrats. We're electable white Democrats. We're cool with y'all. We can't be openly progressive as you may want, as the progressives want us to be, or as championing overtly minority rights the way you want us to be. But we're the best we're the best you're gonna get. And that's kind of the message that Vice President crystallized in that statement. Will then vote for Trump, which is, then what's your alternative? Guess what? I'm the best you're gonna get. And I think not only as voters of color, but as Democrats in this case, I think this cycle, if anything, has to repel that notion. Because regardless if you end up supporting someone that's more overtly progressive, like Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, or one of these other major candidates one of these other candidates that we discussed, of course, I'm endorsing Julian Castro, is that we have to repel the notion that we can't do better. We can do better. The last several election cycles have shown that the electorate's there. I mean, Hillary Clinton, for all of her foibles, won the popular vote. So I think we have to push back on that notion, not only because that's the direction our country has to go, but from purely an electoral strategy. If the energy and the overall messaging next fall, as we go up in the most important election in our lives, albeit certainly our children's lives, literally where the state of our democracy is at stake, the attitude and the energy from the top of the tick can't be, well, I'm the best you're going to get. And so that's why I have not, although we got a lot of love for him, love for his team, they've never really seriously considered Vice President Biden in this process.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think, look, all of our voters deserve the best candidate. And we can't just go on saying that, better don't mean best, right? And so we have to go with the best. Right. Look, we're in November, we're just a couple of days away from Thanksgiving, and so some would argue we're getting really, really close to the primaries. We're kind of late in the game. Maybe it's the fourth quarter of this whole nomination process. So, Ray, how can Julian Castro make it at this point? And what can people do to help Julian move up as a top tier candidate?
I think that's an excellent question. And that's kind of like what was that show, $100,000 pyramid or whatever? That's, the $100,000 question, $1 million question. And look, I think if it wasn't this particular election cycle and this particular election calendar, I think it'd be a hard argument to make at this point for there's no question about it. But I want people to understand this, and particularly for Latino voters, for voters of color, and for voters that aren't totally that know that the standard, kind of typical Democrat's not the answer, but also for whatever reason aren't connected to the progressive ethos of Senator Sanders and Senator Warren. I think you have to look to the electoral calendar to understand that our voice can still be heard in this process. And so if you add up the Iowa caucus, the New Hampshire primary, South Carolina, and then look towards the Nevada caucus and then Super Tuesday, March 2nd, which is where you're going to have both just amongst many states, California and Texas voting on March 2nd. All of those initial states are just a small fraction of the total electoral votes that are going to be distributed. So, in fact, if you're a voter in Texas, you're a voter in California, you're a voter in Nevada, you're a voter in South Carolina, that's looking at the polls and saying, if after Nevada and Iowa, and Biden's looking weak, and I'm not feeling this top tier either, then we have an alternative. We have an alternative that's been a consistent champion in this electoral cycle. Again, for not only economic inequality, but looking at every issue, prioritizing every issue from the lens of racial inequality. And that's very important. So the bottom line is that, and I'll just say it from a Latino perspective, just if the Latino electorate said, you know what, forget what the Des Moines Register says, forget what they say on MSNBC, forget what the Democratic establishment telling me, forget what even my local council person's telling me. This is the candidate for the time that can not only bring our country together, but really lead our country in the way that I think represents the values of my family and my community. Then the choice is in our hands, because the Latino electorate in California has more power in this process from an electoral perspective than the voters, all the voters in Iowa and New Hampshire combined. And that's not including African Americans. And by the way, Julian Castro has gotten a lot of interest and support in the African American community. So if we work together and not listen to the polls, not listen to the standard, historical precedents, well, then it's Iowa, then everyone gets behind the Iowa person, then the black folks in South Carolina, and just vote with our hearts as I and move to what compels you, which is what I'm doing today. Not looking at polls, not looking at what works for me, what campaign I can hop onto that's raising a lot of money, but just doing the right thing and being transparent with our found translation community. Julian Castro certainly has a path, just with the Latino electorate in the Southwest alone. But of course, with his platform, and I encourage everyone to go to JulianForTheFuture.com. If you read his policy platform, regardless of your ethnic background, I think you're going to find a lot there that you're going to be very excited about.
Well, there you have it, folks. I mean, as Ray just said, go to JulianForTheFuture.com to check out more policy positions, events, potentials that you can kind of get involved with Julian, or even if you just want some unanswered questions. I mean, this is what's about it. And I think, Ray, I think it's important that we all kind of search our hearts and try to figure that out and try to figure out how we can be involved in this process. It is our democracy. It is time for us to not just go with the flow, but really go with where we want to go.
And then let me throw something else at you, Albert, in terms of what you can do for Julian now, is that part of the dynamic here is the money. And if you look at the polls, I mean, look, Tom Steyer, look, we got a lot. Tom's a good man. He's a good man. He's done a lot of good in the environmental community, in the Latino mobilization community, in the youth organizing community. Tom Steyer is a good man. But how did Tom Steyer go from 0 to 3-4% in these polls? Because he had the money to do it. So my question to whether it's Latinos or people that like Julian Castro and believe, wow, you know what? He's been the wokest. If you really look at it, he's been the one that really has led. I mean, he's the first one that said Sandra Bland's conversations in these debates. He's the first one that said we need to stop treating immigrants like criminals in these debates. He's the first one. He went to Puerto Rico when nobody was talking about Puerto Rico in the debate. They're still not talking about Puerto Rico in these debates. And he's the only one out there doing that. He's the one talking about reproductive freedom and reproductive rights in a very real housing. Let me talk about that for a second, Albert, if I can. I travel the country. I work with Latino leaders. I work with leaders all over the country, and I've been to so many of these communities that can decide this election. East LA, Mission District in San Francisco, South Phoenix, Western San Antonio. All those communities are going to be voting on Super Tuesday, March 2nd. Denver, Colorado, Las Vegas, the east side of Las Vegas, the north side, all these, North Philly, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, all these places, Orlando, Florida. The biggest issue on the ground, industry, day to day, is housing. And not only does he have the obvious experience in that area, but who's been the one bringing the housing discussion to the debate? And when he wasn't on the debate, he's the one tweeting about it. So to the point of this, if the Latino community and the people that support Julian Castro's vision today, this week, give him a generous, not just $5, $20, put a little extra out there. Give him $100, give him $200, give him $500. You got it? And give him the resources over the next 2 months to advertise his vision, let people know his vision in the Iowas, in the New Hampshires, in the South Carolinas, in the Southwest states for Super Tuesday. That'll change the whole dynamic of this conversation like that. So are we about sitting back and waiting and hoping we get someone that's as good as we're going to get? Or are we going to be proactive in this process, stand up for ourselves and say, you know what? Adios, Trump. We got to make this happen right now.
No, it's true. And the time is now, right? The time is now to do it. And the time is now for everyone to really kind of get involved. Because it is, it is not too late. It's never too late to do the right thing. And I think this is the point that we're trying to make here today. And look, we'll continue to still have the conversation. Folks can check out, if folks want to see what we've talked about before, our post-debate coverage and other things that we've done. You can check out us, those videos on Facebook. You can also check out us at foundintranslation.co, foundintranslation.co. And look on us on Twitter and on IG at Ray's Podcast, right? Check out those mediums, those social media platforms. And you can find out not only what we've done and how we've covered it, but how we will continue to go and cover this as we get to closer and closer, not just to the primaries, but to this great and really important consequential election that we're going to be having. Ray, any last thoughts in terms of that you want to let folks know as we wrap this up?
Well, no, I want to again just thank you, Albert, in particular, for being part of this very special episode and very special announcement. I want to reiterate again, this is just my personal endorsement, not even the endorsement of the show, because my other collaborators, Albert Garcia, Dionelli, Christina, the list goes on and on. They have their own personal, either they have their own candidates or they have not made their own personal endorsements. So I want to respect their autonomy. So, Albert, if you ever want to discuss if and when you make that decision, if you want to share it on the show, that's certainly within your parameters. I also want to share in terms of the spirit of the show and transparency is that this is not going to impact the content of our show. This is not going to become, even though I've made this personal decision to support Julian Castro for president of the United States, this is not going to become a Julian Castro advertising infomercial show. We're still going to provide straight analysis. I'm going to be making some analysis on the next episode about sort of prognosticating the race, which some would argue sort of goes against my personal endorsement, but I got to keep it real with people. And it's not going to impact even how we produce the show. So if people that support Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Mayor Pete Buttigieg or are still sort of on the fence and have not made decisions, they will be booked on the show as they would have, before today. So I just want people to know that I want to be transparent with our audience, our Found in Translation community. And I'm here to, again, this is simply a personal endorsement. And again, I want to thank Elber Garcia for being part of this very historic conversation. We've never done anything like this on the show, but I thought I was compelled after Wednesday night's debate and made this personal decision. And I wanted to share with our people in real time.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, thanks a lot again, Ray. And again, this is a special episode of our Found in Translation podcast and video talk show. And again, you can check us all out at foundintranslation.co. Also, check us out on social media at Ray's podcast, both on Twitter and IG, as well as on your favorite and on your other favorite Facebook.
And also, Albert, if you go to foundintranslation.co, you'll actually see the formal written statement of the endorsement, which includes other. I share other information that you may want to say as well, and that's also something you could share with your network of friends and associates.
So share with your network, keep up the conversation, and always remember that it's never too late to do the right thing and never too late to get involved in our democracy. Well, there you go, have it, folks, and we'll see you later on the flip side.
Thank you. Best of luck, Julia.